We're going to talk a little bit more about inversions by talking about the symbols that are most commonly used to indicate inversions. It can get kind of tiresome and weary to always write first inversion, root position, second inversion, etc. So we're going to use numbers that are derived from figured bass, which was a system of creating chords off of the bass note in Baroque times. Baroque music, if you ever look at continuo parts, the bass parts, they have little numbers all over that. So we're going to take those figured bass symbols, and that's what we use now to indicate inversions in the music that we'll look at. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close and very similar, and it works really well. So we derive it from figured bass, and we actually call them bass position symbols. Short for BPS for short. And again, the reason it's so important is that, remember, we're going to derive the inversion off of the bass note. Again, remember, the bass note is equal to the lowest note in the chord. Okay, just as a quick reminder. It's very important to know that, and because the bass note is going to quite literally dictate what the inversion of the chord is going to be. Okay, so let's talk about what the numbers are. We'll talk about what the meaning of the numbers on the second half of this same video, and you'll have the option of just stopping there. It's at the very outset, the very minimum, you should know the numbers, and I'll explain what the numbers mean a little bit later, but I'll give you the option of stopping. So that you can come back to it later. So let's first talk about root position. Whenever anything is in root position, it's either blank, meaning no numbers at all, or it will say 5, 3. Okay, so you'll see numbers, the number 5 on top of the number 3. If it is in first inversion, most commonly, you'll see it just as a 6. Sometimes you'll see it 6 with a 3 on the bottom. But when you see just a 6, you can assume that that particular chord is a first inversion chord. And finally, second inversion is always going to have a 6 and is always going to have a 4. Line that up a little bit better. So 6-4. So again, root position is blank or 5-3. First inversion, typically just 6, but you'll also see 6-3. And second inversion is always 6-4. So that's it. That's all you need to know, at least for right now, in terms of trying to figure out what the inversion is going to be in a given chord. So you have the option of stopping here and coming back to the explanation a little bit later. You sure you're sticking around? Okay, I take it that you're going to stick around to hear the rest of this. So we're going to talk a little bit about why it's 5-3, where we get these numbers, 6-3, 5-3, 6-4, etc. So I'm going to delete these, and we're going to start with just a root position G major triad. Okay, we've seen this a lot, and so you'll notice this is a root position triad, G major triad, G on the bottom, and we have a nice stacked triad right there. So you'll notice the distance between G and B happens to be a 3, and the distance between G and D happens to be a 5. Okay, so we get those numbers from a close position triad in root position, and the distances from the root to the third and the root to the fifth. So here's the fifth and the third. Okay, let's take a first inversion. Probably understand where this is going. You're probably guessing where it's going. And in this case, B to D is a third. Oops, let's put that a little bit readable, more readable. And B to G is a sixth. Okay, that's where we get the 6-3. Just for shorthand, we often will just see the 6. And then finally, second inversion, D to G is a 4, and D to B is a 6. So we get 6, 4. And that's it. So that's where we actually derive that only from close position chords. It doesn't mean that if it's not in close position, we don't use these numbers. We use these numbers regardless if it's in close position or open position. The most important thing is that we're looking at the bass note, and these are the numbers that we will use. So again, this is root position, first inversion, second inversion. And more commonly, root position will be blank. Oops, misspelled that. Most commonly, that's going to be blank. Most commonly, that will just be a 6. This will always be a 6/4. Okay, so there it is. So just because we're showing, again, just because we're showing this as close position chords, we'd use the same symbols if this was an open position, but we derive the numbers themselves from close position.